Hello, it is Ryan, and we could all use an extra bright spot in our day, couldn't we? Just to make up for things like sitting in traffic, doing the dishes, counting your steps, you know, all the mundane stuff. That is why I'm such a big fan of Chumba Casino. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere with daily bonuses. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com. That's ChumbaCasino.com.
Sponsored by Chumba Casino. No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
This message comes from Greenlight. Ready to start talking to your kids about financial literacy? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app that teaches kids and teens how to earn, save, spend wisely, and invest with your guardrails in place. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on your kids' spending with real-time notifications. Join millions of parents and kids building healthy financial habits together on Greenlight. Get started risk-free at greenlight.com/audio.
It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. We got a big guy on tonight, Thomas Sheridan, who has all the serious dirt on this Jimmy Savile case. He's going to be teaching me all about it. He's the author of a bunch of great books that you can't pronounce. Valpurgis Night, Volume 1. He's the author of a book called Puzzling People, The Labyrinth of the Psychopath. Another one is The Anvil of the Psyche and Defeated Demons. He has a website called ThomasSheridanArts.com, and he has a YouTube channel called Thomas Sheridan Arts on YouTube. But before we get to good old Thomas Sheridan, I got a couple announcements for you. I got a whole bunch of stuff coming up with what's his name, John B. Wells. We got about 3 shows coming up in the next month or two on the John B. Wells Caravan to Midnight. We're doing a second or third show, I don't even know anymore, about the Las Vegas shooters, the Millers there, Jared and Amanda Miller, and we're going to have back Gordon Martinez and the governor candidate and all that bunch. Let's see. Okay, coming up in August, I'm going to be doing a second live show during the week on an unannounced station that's just launching, and that's going to be on Thursday nights. And my daughter Victoria is going to be doing her show right before mine. She's going to be playing a podcast, and I'm going to go on live for about an hour, and then either I'm going to play a podcast or I'm going to have a live guest, and then after that we're going to do an after show after that too. So Thursday night's going to be a big deal for us coming up. You can catch all our shows on the Opperman Report on the YouTube channel or Spreaker.com, and very soon we're going to be on iHeartRadio. One more big announcement. A couple of years ago, I was working on a little project. Some friends of mine came to me. They were putting together a pilot for a TV series, and it's sort of like a what's that thing called? Twilight Zone type thing, right? And so they put together this little pilot there, and I helped them out. I helped them get locations. I did some casting for them to put together this little project. I thought it had vanished and disappeared and didn't take off, but what I found out was that it's just been optioned or has some kind of financing with the studio behind them or something, because it's up on my IMDb page now, and it's called The Fly Trap, and it's a pilot for a TV series. And it's just been sort of, not picked up, but they've been given money to like refilm it all and put together a bigger, better pilot. Tonight, with Thomas Sheridan, I really got to thank Christoph Scott Moses, who's one of my producers, who put us together. He's really into this story and this case and stuff like that, and he's been following Thomas Sheridan for a while on YouTube and his different YouTube channels and stuff like that. And he's the one that booked this guest for us tonight. So big thanks out there to Christoph Moses. Big thanks to my producer, Ann, who is such a sweetheart and works 40 hours a week on this show, getting the show out there. And to Keith Davis, our street, our thug in the streets out there of Portland, Oregon, taking on the city council and taking on the cops and doing whatever you got to do. Coming up next week, we have Hart Fisher, who's a radio host in Portland, Oregon. And I'm going to bring Keith on, too, with Heart Fishing. We're going to be doing a lot of discussions there. So without further wasting any of my time, we have Thomas Sheridan. Thomas, are you there?
I am indeed, Ed. Very nice to be on your show, and thank you for having me.
No, thank you very much, man. I'm very excited about this. I've been talking about it for weeks. Give people an idea of who you are and you know, the books you've written and your background and stuff like that. And then we'll get into the story that we're going to talk about tonight and other things.
Well, I was born in Dublin, Ireland. I grew up on the north side of the city in a pretty tough working class area where the only way out was to be in a rock band, a professional soccer player, a boxer, or a gangster. And I could play guitar, so I managed to get out through that route. And I found myself when I was 19 in New York playing in a band on the Lower East Side. And
wait a second, what year was that?
1987.
Okay, because I was in New York City on the Lower East Side in the 80s.
Really? What year?
Well, I grew up in Staten Island, and but I hung out on the Lower East Side from high school until I was about 29.
Oh, okay. So, well, you know about like Avenue A and the Bleecker.
Sure,
and,
of course, yeah, Bleecker, of course. Are you kidding me?
Yeah,
I hung out there. I watched
CBGB's. I practically lived in there.
Okay, well, dude, man,
the Lismar Lounge on Avenue A.
Dude, man, I was one of the yippies over there on number 9 Bleecker Street, right around the corner from CBGB's.
Oh, small world indeed.
I bet we knew each other, man.
We probably passed each other in the street, or probably were next to each other in Stromboli's Pizza or somewhere, something like that.
Yeah. How cool is this? Okay.
Anyway, I ended up over there, and it was a fabulous time. And then you have to grow up, and I studied graphic design, and I ended up getting jobs in places in Wall Street because it was a time when it was changing over from the old-fashioned communications to modern computers in a different style, and the financial services were changing in Wall Street. And I landed right on my feet, and I was working in, you know, all the big investment banks and making good money and having a great time. And then suddenly I came upon individuals within that industry that were very strange, particularly in senior management. And I didn't know anything about psychopathology at the time. I just thought psychopaths were... It
is Ryan Seacrest here. There was a recent social media trend which consisted of flying on a plane with no music, no movies, no entertainment. But a better trend would be going to ChumbaCasino.com. It's like having a mini social casino in your pocket. Chumba Casino has over 100 online casino-style games, all absolutely free. It's the most fun you can have online and on a plane. So grab your free welcome bonus now at ChumbaCasino.com. Sponsored by Chumba Casino. No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus terms and conditions apply.
Did you know that parents rank financial literacy as the #1 most difficult life skill to teach? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app for families. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on your kids' spending with real-time notifications. Kids learn to earn, save, and spend wisely, and parents can rest easy knowing their kids are learning about money with guardrails in place. Try Greenlight risk-free today at greenlight.com/audio.
Serial killers. Until one day, a guy that I worked with told me he was one, half jokingly, and then explained to me that he'd been diagnosed as one. And so it fascinated me because it kind of explained a lot of like dark kind of strange people I knew in my life, and as well as the ones that I was working with. And so it was very difficult to find any information on psychopathology at the time. And so I was relying mostly on books that were criminal profiling and stuff like that. And I was trying in my own kind of head to translate that on serial killers into non-violent types. So it was always, I wouldn't say I was constantly into it, but it was always something that I was interested in. I always looked up any kind of papers I could find, any magazine articles in the New Scientist and things like that relating to it. And so, you know, that went on. And then in 2011, I finally published a book on it called Puzzling People, The Labyrinth of the Psychopath. And it kind of got me a bit of a name because it allowed people to understand what psychopathology was in a basic sense. that it wasn't just serial killers. It was also people who were highly manipulative and dangerous, and they thrive in management positions in big business and media and places like that. And I also had a great big interest because I was an artist in symbolism and social engineering, and so I had all this stuff going on. And I've written 3 other books since, and so that's why I'm here. That's basically how I became involved in a public profile. I came as through writing books on these subjects, and that's basically it. Do you want me to get into the Savile thing from here, or do you want me to continue on with this?
Continue on with this, man. Let everybody know who you are and how you got here.
Well, I made, like I said, I started a website. I made a YouTube channel. My original idea on psychopathology was to write a kind of a horror novel. And when I had this, while I was running this I set up this kind of blogspot thing, and on it, and amazingly, people were commenting, saying, "Oh, don't write a horror novel. Write about these people that you work with and how they really were, because this is useful shit." This is useful stuff. This is useful stuff because I'm learning about the guy I work with, the bully at work, my boss, my ex-husband, and so puzzling people came from that, and it got me quite a profile very, very quickly and very early on. And I got on all the big alternative radio stations, and I got a lot of attention. Then I wrote another book called on a similar vein about psychopathology at the cultural and social level, like governments, cultural Marxism, that kind of thing, fascism, and that was called Defeat the Demons. And then the next book in 2012 was The Anvil of the Psyche, which was basically all the kind of the social engineering through manipulation of consciousness, through graphics, through design, through languaging, through music, through social programming, through the visual symbolism and motifs presented to us within the sort of the mass media, the mass culture, and to help people. See, all my books are ultimately they're about survival manuals in a world that's basically run by crazies. And then the last one, most recent book, which came out a few months back, was Walpurgis Night, Volume 1, about the occult aspects of the Third Reich, how it developed in Germany, and how it actually did to the German psyche in over a period of 50 years or so, leading up to 1919 in Munich, which is a pivotal time, and how they were basically had their whole culture changed and their minds rewired to put them in a position where they not only, could accept fascism and someone like Adolf Hitler, but they wanted them too. They needed him. He was a savior. And so that's basically been my journey to this point forward. I'm fascinated by how the world is so precisely dysfunctional. I'm amazed at how human beings are easily controlled and manipulated to accept this incredible dysfunctionality at the leadership structures, and why it's so simple to actually get out of it, to avoid it, and fight it. And when I say fight it, I'm not talking about like going to war against it, but how to build a wall or a firewall around your consciousness. And it was a tremendous education for me along the way because, I actually know how the world works now. I know what the world is. The world is essentially a gigantic psych ward with their leaders who are more mentally ill. When I say mentally ill, I mean they're pathologically dangerous. They're a lot of them are psychopathic or proto-psychopaths, and they have actually made us insane in order for them to keep and stay in power. And it's been like that now probably for hundreds of years. And we're at a point in history where it's breaking. They're actually falling apart. And the subjects we're going to talk about tonight will be one example of how that is happening in the UK in the most remarkable way, how the old structures are, the old psychopathic control grid through British politics, media, royalty, and entertainment is collapsing literally by the hour in front of the mainstream, and not just the alternative. British society has gone through the looking, and to a certain extent all our societies, but it's particularly UK is the front line now, has gone through the looking glass and out the other side, and the world is never going to be the same again.
You ever see that movie American Psycho?
Yeah,
Yeah, right. Now that's pretty much what you're talking about, right? How that guy, who was that actor? He's a big famous actor now.
Yeah.
Ryan Seacrest here. When you have a busy schedule, it's important to maximize your downtime. One of the best ways to do that is by going to ChumbaCasino.com. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino games like spin slots, bingo, and solitaire that you can play for free for a chance to redeem some serious prizes. So hop on to ChumbaCasino.com now and live the Chumba life. Sponsored by Chumba Casino. No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus terms and conditions apply.
What makes a great pair of glasses? At Warby Parker, it's all the invisible extras without the extra cost. Their designer quality frames start at $95, including prescription lenses, plus scratch-resistant, smudge-resistant, and anti-reflective coatings, and UV protection, and free adjustments for life. To find your next pair of glasses, sunglasses, or contact lenses, or to find the Warby Parker store nearest you, head over to warbyparker.com. That's warbyparker.com.
Yes, Patrick Bateman was the character, and the actor's name was, it escapes me now, it'll come to me.
Yeah,
but
big
the
actor.
film, the film is very accurate, very accurate, I might add, except for the violence. Generally, they're not violent.
But especially for that time around New York City in the 80s when all that stuff was going on, all that the Reaganomics, and Wall Street and stuff like that. Yeah. Okay, so then, now this whole Jimmy Savile story, okay, which is just fascinating. But a lot of people in the U.S. here aren't as familiar with Jimmy Savile as you guys are over there. So give us an idea. First of all, what's his life story? I heard there's some discrepancies in his biography.
Well, Jimmy Savile, to say he was a superstar would be an underestimation. He was an enormously successful television, radio, and charity figure. To compare him to someone in the United States, imagine Johnny Carson and Jesse Jackson combined with that level of power and influence, who turns out to be the most notorious paedophile that ever existed. Someone who had sex with dead bodies. This is official now. Removed their glass eyeballs and made jewelry from them. And I believe to be, and many people in the mainstream, although they're still ticking away and hiding the evidence, I believe to be a notorious serial killer, directly involved with the most infamous serial killer in the history of Britain after Jack the Ripper, a guy called Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper, back in the 1970s. Now that's how big he was, and that's how bad he was. Now his life story, well, Savile, when you look at him now, you say, how the hell did this guy ever become such a huge star? He's just a creepy guy. And that's how a lot of us as kids felt about him. I certainly felt that way about him. I didn't like him. As a kid even, I didn't like his TV shows. I found him very strange. His biggest TV show was a show called Jim Will Fix It. But he was incredibly well known for charities and raising money for charity. He was born in the 1920s, I think it was 1926, and he died in 2011. I think he was nearly 85 years of age. He was born in the industrial city of Leeds in Yorkshire in England. It's one of the largest cities in the UK after London. It's basically a centre of coal mining and industry. And he claimed that he grew up from a very poor working class background, and during World War II, he didn't go into the army. He was conscripted to work with something called Bevan boys, which were young men or people who couldn't serve in the military in World War II, but used to work in the mines as coal miners. And he makes up these stories, but there's no proof of this. This is just what he says he was. Now, he was born to two people in a working class couple, his mother and father in Leeds, and were his mother was all through his life. It was to a very strict Roman Catholic family, and he was one of 7 children. He was the youngest of 7 children. He was the 7th son, and he was born to a guy called Vincent Joseph Marie Savile. That's very Catholic when you think about it. He died in 1953, a long time ago, by the way. And that was his father, and he was a clerk in an insurance agency. And his mother was a woman called Agnes Monica Kelly, and she died in 19 72, age 85. Now, what's significant about her is that he had built a cult around his mother. And he called her the Duchess, which we'll talk about the reasons for that later on. But also, he believed that he'd been saved by fate, as many psychopaths do actually, as a young child by a Scottish nun called Margaret Sinclair, whose own story is kind of strange because she claims to have been born in extreme poverty, and maybe she was, but Sinclair is a surname of Scotland that's basically Scottish royalty. They built, Roslin Chapel and so on. So it's very interesting that someone with the surname Sinclair, claims to be impoverished, but it may be the similar story to Savile's own mother and why he called her a Duchess, that she could have been the bastard offspring of royalty, which was not uncommon back in those days. Now he claims to have worked as a coal miner and had all these working class jobs, but it's never really been, shown. He was also I think he tried to be a professional cyclist and a professional wrestler. And then there was it wasn't a pirate radio station. It was a radio station that was basically outside the UK, but it was based in London. It was called Radio Luxembourg, and it had its radio license through the country of Luxembourg. And they were the first ones to start broadcasting pop music into Britain, American pop music mainly. And he started there in 1958, and he was there till 1967, and he landed basically in pop music, in radio, in broadcasting at the time of the 60s,
British invasion.
English invasion. Yeah, exactly. Pop music, the Beatles. He couldn't have been more perfectly placed to slot in there.
Interesting. Because
there was a huge industry now growing in the UK on pop music, the radio stations, and he was it. And he was it. And he landed on his feet. He was in there with all of them. And he was the very first host of a TV show that's still running to this day called Top of the Pops in 1964. And it was held inside an old converted church in Manchester. And, yep, and which has an interesting kind of history around that area too.
And wait, was that a TV show or a radio show?
That was a TV show.
Like a dance show,
in
right?
64. Yeah, and it still ran as a live show, as a weekly show until 2006, and it made or broke all the bands, all the singers. If you got into the BBC Top 30 and you were featured on Top of the Pops, you were guaranteed you were going to make a lot of money, be a star, and that was it. He was a kingmaker in pop music. He was
even with the Beatles. Didn't he even produce events, concerts for the Beatles?
Yes, he did, but the thing is that he wasn't as close to the Beatles as he tried to make out he was. Okay. Because of his position in BBC and being a pop music presenter, he did encounter them, but he's full of it too. He's one of these kind of Walter Mitty characters, pretend he was bigger than he was, but in some ways he really was like that. I get the impression that many of the bands, from the Beatles to the Sex Pistols, couldn't stand being around them. And that came out much later on. He then went from Top of the Pops, moved through various TV and radio shows. His radio show was big. And things really took off for him in the 1980s, in the mid-1970s, when he hosted a TV show called Jim'll Fix It on Saturday nights, where he basically made people's dreams come true, well, kids. He also at the same time had a radio show, and also was co-hosting Top of the Pops. So he was Mr. BBC at that period. He was raking in enormous viewing figures. He was taking in something like 40 to 50 million listeners every week all over the English-speaking world. He was unknown in North America, but he was well known in many other places through the BBC's various global broadcasting networks. He also was making enormous amounts of money for doing TV adverts for the likes of British Railways and things like that. In fact, he made a very successful series of advertisements on TV for British Rail in the 1970s called This Is the Age of the Train, which basically brought millions of people back onto the railways who had abandoned them for their cars, started using train travel again. He was also heavily involved in any kind of public service announcements regarding the use of safety belts and things like that. He also produced several books on taking care of children and protecting them from pedophiles while he was the most notorious pedophile of all.
But let me ask you, interrupt you a second. Now, when did the rumors about his pedophilia start? And was it first that just underage teenage girls from Top of the Pops kind of thing, or was it outright little kids early on? Because I know there's been rumors about this guy for years.
There's been rumours and talk for years, but not within the BBC or British Entertainment. Well, there was, but they never let them out. He had a network of people who protected him at the very top, the very, very top of society, going right to the royal family. We're talking Prince Charles here. And the rumours were always there that he was a bit weird. Now, but he had it was always like a typical psychopath. He hid it through his charity work. He was always raising money for charity. He got himself very involved with the right people. Even when here in Ireland, he was very connected to the Goulding family, who were a billionaire chemical sort of empire here in Ireland. They produced fertilizer and exported all over the world. He was very in with them. He used to stay when he came to Ireland, he used to stay in the house of the Prime Minister as a personal guest. This guy wielded incredible power, but no one in the circle at the top really spoke about his weirdness, but everyone a lot of people on the street found him creepy and odd. And the rumors started to really come out after a TV show, which was the thing that alerted me to him in the late 1990s by the BBC presenter Louis Theroux, who used to spend the weekends hanging out with famous celebrities, as living with them as their lives were, talking to them, trying to get to know them. And he featured Jimmy Savile, and I watched that show live that night, and you could hear the collective gasp on these islands as what Jimmy Savile was behind the scenes was revealed to the world indirectly. And that was the same night. I was over at my friend's house. We were drinking tea together, watching the show, and it was like one of those moments in my life I'll never forget, because I instantly knew that Jimmy Savile was a serial killer because I'd read a lot of books profiling serial killers up until that point. And even that was a crazy idea, but I said it to my friend immediately when he made a term. He made a statement. He said, "Women are brain damage." A very strange statement when Louis Theroux asked him how come he never had a wife or a girlfriend, and he went, "Women are brain damage," in a very glib kind of way. And I knew right there and then that he had done something to women's brains or their heads or something. And the obvious conclusion for me from that point on was that he was involved with Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper.
Let me ask you a question. Did Savile ever have a public girlfriend, a long-term girlfriend ever?
No, he always boasted about having hundreds of women.
Right.
Even not long before he died, he used to say things like on TV, like girls' schools all over the country are afraid.
How to have fun anytime, anywhere. Step 1. Go to ChumbaCasino.com.
ChumbaCasino.com. Got it.
Step 2. Collect your welcome bonus.
Come to Papa Welcome Bonus.
Step 3. Play hundreds of casino-style games for free.
That's a lot of games. All for free?
Step 4. Unleash your excitement.
Woohoo!
Chumba Casino has been delivering thrills for over a decade. So claim your free welcome bonus now and live the Chumba life. Visit ChumbaCasino.com.
VGW Group. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
This message comes from Greenlight. Ready to start talking to your kids about financial literacy? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app that teaches kids and teens how to earn, save, spend wisely, and invest with your guardrails in place. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on your kids' spending with real-time notifications. Join millions of parents and kids building healthy financial habits together on Greenlight. Get started risk-free at greenlight.com/audio.
He'd always make out stories that he had more girlfriends than anyone, but he didn't have any girlfriends. These were just people he sexually assaulted, right. and whatever he did to them, this was his idea of it, almost like a relationship, was to abuse a person, abuse a woman, going right down to very young ones.
You know, it's interesting too the way you describe like how this documentary came into his home, and his odd behavior became obvious to everyone, because that's the same thing that happened with Michael Jackson. Do you remember that?
Exactly.
It's exactly the same kind of thing. And so many people just had to, their jaws must have dropped, you know, watching Michael Jackson at home. And that scene where he had that movie theater on his property with a bed in the middle of the movie theater. You know, and they'd say, well, what do you have a bed here for? And he says, well, some of these little children, they come here, they're so sick, they're on chemotherapy, they can't get out of bed, so I put them in a little bed. You know, it's just, you know, like insane. Like, what is going on in these people's heads? They must have themselves surrounded with so many people that are justifying their actions that they don't realize that by going on TV, they're going to expose themselves.
That's exactly it, and they enter into a false reality.
Yeah.
And that happened to Savile when, I mean, you know, he didn't care at that point. He was like, he didn't care anyway. But they showed Savile's bed, and it was this weird kind of girly, you know, for an elderly man, a weird kind of silken drapes hanging over the side. And he called his bed the altar. And Louis Theroux said, you know what happens on beds, Jimmy? And he goes, what? With a smirk on his face. And Louis Theroux goes, people get sacrificed. And then he went to his mother's apartment in Scar, seaside town. Paedophiles in England, the big ones, I mean, they always migrate towards seaside towns because they can dump the bodies offshore in fish boats and pleasure yacht and like Ted Heath's yacht and things like that. And his mother's wardrobe was there, and a Norman Bates kind of experience. All the clothes were all perfectly cleaned and folded, and this was the Duchess, his mother. The Duchess's clothes. I now believe that those clothes were not necessarily from his mother. I believe many of those clothes were probably mementos taken from victims that he killed as part of his killing rampages, which will come out in time, believe me. And they were just kept there, and this is what psychopaths do, and serial killers do. Psychopathic serial killers will keep mementos from their conquest of their killings, and every so often relive the rush, that flood of dopamine in the frontal cortex. They will extract this and sometimes wear the clothes of the victims to relive the energetic, this kind of like satanic infusion of the moment of death of their victim in the clothes. And this is the only reason Savile kept that wardrobe and kept it immaculate and protected. And it became so clear. Now, most people were saying, okay, he's a bit funny, he's a bit odd, a bit of a weirdo, but no one ever thought that as soon as he died back in 2000, when he was like 86, nearly 85 years old, back in, I think it was October 2011, that soon after his death, the revelations would come out way beyond what even people imagined. I mean, and they're literally breaking by the week how surreal they are.
Okay, I'm going to have to take a quick break, but when we get back, I'm going to ask you, how are these revelations coming out? Who's bringing them forward, and how do we know that they're true? So mull on that. This is like just so, I want to ask you too, again, too, don't let me forget, if there's any actual connection with him to Satanism. Has he been connected to Satanists or any satanic cults? Tell me about how this information's coming out, and how reliable is that information?
Yes, Savile was definitely connected to this black occult stuff. There's no doubt about that. In fact, three of the people who testified against him in public, in police hearings, said that he was often dressed as a magician or a devil. He was involved with a very disturbing case in a place called Rochdale, which is outside Manchester in the north of England, where he was involved with a now deceased MP and notorious paedophile called Cyril Smith, where they took children from a poor neighborhood and took them to a stately home. And in that stately home, a big fat man, which is Cyril Smith, and a man who smelled the cigars and dressed like a devil, and that was Jimmy Savile, gave them wine and sweets and molested them. And a lot of that kind of thing went on. Savile, in his own biography, said that he had learned the power to hypnotize people. We're talking about like fascination here. Fascination is the ability to look into someone's eyes and actually change their heartbeat and use it by accessing the blood vessels in the eyes. It's definitely a black magic occult thing, because anyone who's involved in like white magic would never use it, because it's beyond hypnotism. It's getting people to do what they want. And Savile boasted about doing that to get women to give him whatever he wanted in his own biography. And he was involved in the whole State the Home black magic crowd that in the UK that behave like this, and and this is how they are. This is what Dennis Wheatley in all his books, like The Devil Rides Out and To the Devil a Daughter, was describing what life among the British elite is like, and it's a world of sacrifice, ritual occult magic, and Savile was part of it. Now there's many other things to go along with that, but you have to remember Satanism, when we think what Satanism is, we're going to give any kind of name to it. I just call it this black occult. This black occult is not necessarily overt in that they have to dress in robes and perform rituals, or that does happen. It can be just the manipulation of consciousness towards a pathological end on behalf of the magus. And this is what these people would be up to. And he was completely in league with this stuff. For instance, his catchphrases were all magic catchphrases. Abracadabra. He said that all the time.
Really?
Now then, now then, now then. All these kind of repeating things. He had a wand. He always held a cigar, and he pointed at the TV screen when he was making a point. Now, boys and girls. Now then, now then, now. These are all ways of focusing the intent. He was literally a black magician who could spellbind the population of the countries where his TV shows are broadcast, and he did it.
Any connection to the Process Church of the Final Judgment?
Not that I've found. Now, the Process Church thing is interesting because they're very much an East Coast kind of an occult thing in the US, and I haven't seen much to show that they've infiltrated over this part of the world. But I would imagine he was involved in something very similar. And he was definitely involved in kind of a lot of societies, the sort of these like elite societies, like the Knights of Malta and the Order of the Garter, and they're just basically the same kind of thing taken to a more kind of regal level, should we say?
You might want to take a look into that, because the Process Church was actually founded in England.
Yeah, I know, but they never had the profile in this part of the world they had in, say, the East Coast United States. But that could be because they were so powerful they could hide it.
Yeah.
But that's definitely something. Well, it is something I should look into, because we know a lot of these types in America, such as Mark Chapman and the son of Sam Berkowitz, were involved in a lot of these kinds of things.
Right.
And a lot, and. A lot of people don't know that the night before he killed John Lennon, again connected to Savile indirectly, I suppose, he performed what we call some kind of black magic ritual in Central Park. So yeah, there's probably.
Oh, really? I never heard that. I never heard that part.
I found that out recently by a friend of mine who's an actor who played him in a TV in a one-man play at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, and he interviewed the detectives in New York who interviewed Chapman.
Okay.
And that's one of the things they kept quiet, was that Chapman on the night before had performed a black magic ritual, or some kind of, they called it a black magic ritual the night before. And there was all kinds of weird things. I mean, I know we're going off topic here, but there was all kinds of weird things, like there was Chapman doubles all over the Upper West Side.
Yeah, I met Chapman.
Yeah.
I met Chapman at the 9 Bleecker Street over there that weekend. And what's his name? Asher, Jennifer Asher's brother.
Yeah.
Yeah, he not Jennifer Asher's brother, but James Taylor met the other Chapman in the subway station, and they got into a little scuffle, and his manager was Jennifer Asher's brother, who was involved in the Process Church.
And Chapman said he was going to initially he's supposed to have killed Paul Simon, and David Bowie had said he'd been stalked by him the same day. These were all the doubles.
Yeah, right. And I heard a story, too, that supposedly he mailed some bullets to Kenneth Anger.
That's interesting, too. I didn't know that one.
Yeah, and I see a lot of this stuff I'm questioning, because there's definitely a lot of double information coming out, all the Chapman stuff.
Yeah, but there's the Chapman stuff, it gets more surreal as time passed.
Yeah,
right. It definitely does. And there are credible witnesses there, and a lot of them are New York City cops who couldn't understand how the shooting itself, so many the inconsistencies in it. You know, I mean, regular beat cops, and now retired, and could like talk about it.
Yeah, very interesting, because the two of the cops that were right around the corner who got the first call were rookie cops. They were only cops for like 3 months. And they got that call, and they raced over there. You know, they raced over there like lunatics. Like, you know, a real job, you know. And when they got there, there were already cops there, and they already had Chapman in custody.
Incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, a very, very, very unusual case. And you're right. As time passes on, different stories pop up here and there, and you wonder what's real and what isn't.
Yeah, and that's part of black magic as well, as feeding out the disinfo.
Right.
So you always have to, you always have to be a hard-nosed, and almost a hard-nosed, old-fashioned investigative journalist. Like my hero would be like the British journalist from the 1970s, David A. Yallop. You know, he was like one of the last kind of like investigative journalist authors who got his nose dirty, got in there and sifted through all the flotsam and all the rubbish to get the meat of things, you know. And we don't have those kinds of journalists in the mainstream anymore.
No, really, not at all, yeah.
A lot of them have a tendency to like meet an early death. But which happened in the Savile case too as well. A woman called Jill Dando, who was probably the biggest female star on British TV at the time,
right,
did a show called Crime Watch, and back in the late 1990s, she was found shot dead on a doorstep in outside her fashionable home in a fashionable part of London. And the cops arrested a character called Barry George and blamed him they said he was a mad stalker who did it. And the only evidence they had that he was celebrity obsessed was the poor guy was a Queen fan. And he had posters of Freddie Mercury and Brian May from Queen all over his bedroom wall. And he was just a loner. He never harmed anyone. He was an easy one. The media tore him asunder. And he spent 9 years, an innocent man, in prison, and then was released, and they still won't give it.
Hello, it is Ryan, and I was on a flight the other day playing one of my favorite social spin slot games on ChumbaCasino.com. I looked over at the person sitting next to me, and you know what they were doing? They were also playing Chumba Casino. Everybody's loving having fun with it. Chumba Casino is home to hundreds of casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com to claim your free welcome bonus. That's ChumbaCasino.com and live the Chumba life.
Sponsored by Chumba Casino. No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
Over the past 75 years, more than 10,000 chemicals have entered our food supply, but the EU allows just 300 additives. At Thrive Market, we prioritize quality, banning over 1,000 ingredients found in conventional grocery stores. Our Healthy Swap scanner helps you find better versions of your pantry essentials without the junk, dyes, or fillers, and everything is delivered right to your doorstep. So shop at a grocery store that actually cares about your health at thrivemarket.com/get started for 30% off your first order and a free $60 gift.
Any kind of compensation. But turns out now that Jill Dando was executed professional style by a man in a suit. And it's now come out. Now, you asked me about the sources of all this stuff.
Yeah.
Well, Ed, this is what's incredible about these days we're living in. The sources for all this stuff are not alternative sites anymore. They may have began in the alternative world. They may have been speculated by people like me and others, but they're very much being brought. The worst aspects, I might add, are being coming out by the mainstream journalism by the day, by the hour at points. And this is what's coming out. And what came out about the Jill Dando murder was that she was investigating the paedophile ring that Jimmy Savile and the BBC were operating. And she was murdered as a warning to other newspaper journalists: do not report on this subject. And even more incredible, the copper who framed this copper who framed Barry George with the murder of Jill Dando in order to protect Jimmy Savile is now in charge of a very infamous kidnapping of a British child called Madeline McCann.
Yeah.
And he is now the copper involved in the whitewash of that. So I wouldn't like to be an innocent guy in Portugal right now who lives alone and is a Queen fan, because there's a very good chance he'll be stitched up for it. This is how dark these people are. This is the game that they play. We're ready for this now. And I really do believe this is part of this kind of revealing that's going on, is that I think when the details basically became confirmed that Jill Dando was basically whacked by MI5, the British Secret Service, in order to protect the paedophiles in the BBC and the royal family, British journalists, an Irish newspaper journalist, the Irish Times, just blew open a whole thing of of a kids' home in Belfast that was basically ferrying children. The British Secret Service were ferrying children to like wealthy people and British diplomats in Northern Ireland, including Mountbatten, the Queen's brother, at his home. Now, this is huge stuff. It's coming out by the day because the journalists are now kind of rebelling. It's quite obvious now. They're not coming out and directly saying it, but it's almost like there's an unwritten rule among mainstream journalists in the newspapers in the UK now, is that we got to get these cretins back for what they did to Jill Dando. And they're almost collectively terrorizing the elite over there by putting these stories out constantly now. They're coming out at incredible levels, and they're basically taking what the alternative people like myself and others have been talking about for a long time now and pushing it into the mainstream, almost like they're tipping their hat to us. And indirectly, what was called conspiracy theory 6 months ago is now mainstream fact. This is how fast it's moving.
Okay, but my question is, how do we know it's fact? And I heard you describe that there are people testifying at police hearings. So now what kind of hearings are these that they're testifying at? Trials?
Well, they're trials. They're full trials, yeah.
Criminal trials. Against who? Who's being arrested?
One of Savile's co-hosts on the BBC, a guy called Dave Lee Travis, who bears an uncanny resemblance to Peter Savile, the Yorkshire Ripper, Savile's serial killing buddy. He is currently being brought up for a second trial again because his first trial as basically a paedophile sex offender has been dismissed, and they're pulling him back into court again. Literally, there was a thing called Operation U-Tree, where they basically went around and rounded these people up. Now, they stopped at a certain level for sure, and these are crumbs being thrown to the masses. Right. But they're so terrified. I'll tell you where it's coming out of hospitals. Imagine the most bizarre conspiracy around Savile, and then multiply it by 10, and you still wouldn't be near what's come out. For instance, it's come out that Savile was basically running Britain's largest criminal psychiatric facility, filled with serial killers and all kinds of incredibly disturbed and criminally deranged people, Broadmoor. He was handed the keys to this place by Edwina Curry, who was basically the mistress of the then Prime Minister John Major. And he lived in an apartment on the hospital. And we're talking about a DJ, TV presenter, telling the doctors how to do their business, rostering staff, and organizing everything from payrolls to medication schedules. A DJ.
Wait, this came out in court testimony.
This has come out in the mainstream media. It's come out. It's all out there. This is not even remotely doubted. This is what happened.
And I got to tell you though, it's not being played up here in the States as much as it is over there, and that makes me a little worried. You know that
because he wasn't known in America, where he was a household name here.
Top of the Pops is everyone knows Top of the Pops. You know the Beatles are on there.
Yep.
It's well known enough, man, and plus the story is just so gruesome to begin with that just as a story, you'd think it'd be over here. So that kind of makes me a little nervous that it could still get covered up. Yeah.
It's going on everywhere.
Yeah.
This is what we're dealing with. This is how dark these black psychopathic magi who run this world are.
Yeah.
But while he was at Broadmoor, him and the Yorkshire Ripper, Sutcliffe, who's a prisoner there, would be hanging out as best mates, talking, laughing all night long, and then he was also rostering the ship so he could rape certain prisoners who were also locked up in the psychiatric facility. And the staff have all come out to say he was doing it. Doctors come out to say he's doing it, and he was protected because he had Edwina Curry, basically a high-ranking government minister in the British government at the time, gave him that job. Now, as amazing as that is, through his charity work, he also had the keys to many top hospitals in the north of England, where he was going in. This is not conspiracy theory. This is
no. I believe you, man.
So, yeah. I've read this on their main newspapers and seen it on TV.
Yeah.
He went in with the keys to these hospital morgues, took out the dead bodies, and had sex with them removed their glass eyeballs, made rings from the glass eyeball. This is out there.
Right.
And went on top of the pops on his TV show with rings made from the dead bodies, the glass eyeballs of dead bodies of people he had raped in the morgues, in hospitals in the north of England.
As this was going on, did anybody come out and report it as it was going on?
Any doctor or nurse that did was either lost their jobs or it was all hushed up. But people were terrified of him. This is the common thing that comes out over and over again. He had a power over people and a darkness about him that terrified people, even up as far as British royalty. For instance, when Peter Sutcliffe, a guy who'd killed a bunch of women, murdered a bunch of women, I believe, in tandem with Sutcliffe, and that will come out, when he died, was still talking about Savile as if he was afraid of him. This guy, Savile, had this amazing power that people lived in terror of him.
Did Savile travel with bodyguards type situation or by himself?
Well, he had these very peculiar individuals, these kind of weirdos that were his own fix-it guys, and they were kind of like working class guys from where he grew up. And no, they weren't bodyguards as such. They were more kind of like... well, he didn't need a bodyguard. He had the British police and military as his bodyguards. Basically, he had, the British Army protecting him. This guy had, we're talking about a guy who went to Israel and brokered a peace deal. Again, a bloody TV presenter, DJ. This is...
No, wait, I never heard that. Who did he broker the peace deal with?
Well, he claims he brokered the peace deal, but there's a lot of truth to it. He was sent, I think it was 1976 when Jimmy Fix-It was at the peak of its early days of its massive fame. He was asked, they did an episode where a kid wanted to go visit Israel. This is what the show was about, fulfilling wishes. Right. And they went to Israel. He met with the then Prime Minister. He then met with the Mayor of Jerusalem. He traveled all over the country, met with all these leaders and came back. You see, what he was doing, he was running networks. He was also a spy. He was probably carrying documentation and other things between governments, like a diplomatic attaché. And celebrities have always been, traveling celebrities have always been useful to intelligence services for carrying documents and so forth, because they can sneak into them government buildings at a higher echelons of like the control systems in every country and bring documents and so on and so forth in. Now that's even an interesting one. I told you about the woman Goulding, the Irish billionaire family that he was very close to. She was the diplomatic letter carrier for King George V, and she was actually carrying secret letters between Buckingham Palace and number 10 Downing Street, and she was a personal lifelong friend of Jimmy Savile.
Oh my God!
The humble coal miner's son from Leeds. He was nothing of the sort. This guy was beyond anything we could imagine, and and he got away with anything he wanted. Now. And this, I still haven't scratched the surface. And
I can tell. Now this is
I'm still nowhere near what's going to come out next. Like I said, it's like
Sutcliffe though. He knew Sutcliffe before Sutcliffe was arrested.
Oh, this is I don't know what the next break is because we'll need a bit of time to talk about this.
We got 3 minutes for the next break.
Okay, I won't go too much into Sutcliffe, but I will say this: we'll do it after the break because it's a big story all by itself, and it will have the hair standing on people's heads when I get through it. But he had an ability to actually go inside forensic labs in police headquarters and have evidence changed and evidence destroyed. He had friends in the forensic labs. The reason why he could do this, and there's no other, apart from the fact that he had these satanic powers, which I genuinely do believe he had, was that he had royal protection. We're talking about the inner sanctum of the British royal family, almost embracing him as a kindly uncle, but well aware of what he was up to, because there was a TV show, a very popular TV show in the 1970s and 80s. I think it might even still be running in the 90s, called Parkinson, where it was almost like a late night interview show, and he interviewed Jimmy Savile in an episode, and you could see it online. with Alan Alda, the actor from MASH, when that show was all the rage. And he's talking about delivering a little girl to Prince Philip, the Queen's husband, in Buckingham Palace, delivering her like an object to her.
As a joke?
He plays it as a joke, but if you look at...
Looking for excitement? Chumba Casino is here. Play anytime, play anywhere. Play on the train, play at the store, play at home, play when you're bored. Play today for your chance to win and get daily bonuses when you log in. So what are you waiting for? Don't delay. Chumba Casino is free to play.
Experience social gameplay like never before. Go to Chumba Casino right now to play hundreds of games, including online slots, bingo, Slingo, and more. Live the Chumba life at ChumbaCasino.com. VGW Group. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
Alan Alda's face, you can see that Alan Alda is extremely uncomfortable because he knows there's something very suspicious going on here.
Well, very interesting, because Alan Alda later on went to work for Woody Allen, who's now has all kinds of stuff going on with molesting his own daughter, plus marrying his adopted daughter. Okay, bro, where'd we leave off, man? Alan Alda, and what else was it after that?
Well, after he announced on the Parkinson show, glibly and jokingly, he had delivered a little girl to Buckingham Palace for Prince Philip. We find another unbelievable mind game he played with people. There was a TV show called Through the Keyhole, which is hosted by the famous journalist Sir David Frost.
Okay.
And it was basically a light-hearted afternoon TV show where they went to visit famous people's houses and apartments, and they showed you what their hobbies were, what their book collection or record collection was, and then you had to try and guess who it was. Well, they went to one of Jimmy Savile's apartments, again on a seaside location, a coast town called Eastbourne, and his house is kind of odd and strange, and I knew it was Jimmy Savile because I'd already seen the title of the YouTube clip. But he had weird ritual things, like he had 4 rubber ducks on his bed. 3 of them were yellow and 1 was pink, which is just bizarre. Like I pointed out in my book, Defeated Demons, psychopaths have very bizarre taste in music that doesn't make any sense. And his record collection was the band of the Coldstream Guards and some brass band doing Lennon and McCartney, which is very strange considering that he was there at the height of the Beatlemania. And he didn't even have a real Beatles album. But eventually he comes on and they show him, and he's wearing a T-shirt that says, I'm not kidding you, I am an animal and I eat people. That's his T-shirt. I am an animal and I eat people. And when he came out and they announced who he was, he's sitting there at Richard Frost, another Sir, 2 Sirs together, and he's David Frost, sorry, and he's talking about how he's feared in every girls' school in the country. That's what he said. How he's had thousands of girlfriends. How his legs are insured for £1 million. And he gives them to any young woman he sees and says, well, how would you like to stick your hand up £1 million? And this is all live on TV. And the audience are uncomfortably laughing. And then, now here's one that's truly sinister. There was another TV show on that was like a newspaper comedy weekly BBC show hosted by a guy called Paul Merton. I saw this clip with my own eyes, and it was Jimmy Savile was on it not long before he died, where he basically boasted about having any woman, any girl in any school he wanted, and he just took her. And this was put on YouTube. I found the clip. When I went back a few months later to find the clip, the BBC had pulled, through using copyright trumps, all the videos off of Savile, as many as they could, off YouTube. And that video of Savile announcing it on this TV show could not be found. Instead, and this is incredible, what I found was a clip by the host on the same show, Paul Merton, saying, there's a lot of people claim they've seen a clip off this show on YouTube that shows Jimmy Savile sitting over there saying that he did such and such with young women. It never existed. It was just somebody made up and stuck on YouTube. Now you can clearly see that Paul Merton, the guy, the host, knows he's lying, and you can see the co-hosts of the show are looking at him, and they know he's lying. This is the lengths that the BBC were going through to try and absolve themselves of their There are 40 years. There are 40 years now of protecting Jimmy Savile. That's what was going on.
Savile also, he spent Christmas holiday at the palace?
With Margaret Thatcher, the Prime Minister.
Okay.
He spent something like 11 Christmases with her in her home. In fact, this leads us to the next part of the story. She was the Prime Minister when the Yorkshire Ripper, Peter Sutcliffe, was going on his murder rampage during the north of it's like we're living in, you know, we used to watch those TV shows or read books when we were kids, like Caligula, that movie, remember that? Or the stories of ancient Rome, like Nero, or the Borgias of, you know, Renaissance Italy. And you'd watch these shows and you say, my God, or, you know, Vlad the Impaler, my God, isn't it amazing we don't live like that anymore? Well, the fact is, Jimmy Savile shows that was still going on among the royal and among the elite in the 1970s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s. And I'm sure still going on with somebody else behind the scenes. We're always conditioned to believe that these crazy things only take place in the past when they're true popular culture, when in reality, Caligula's, Nero's, and the Borgias will exist with us today. They're just that we just believe that was somehow, that would never happen today. When in reality, Savile proves that it does. Now, the Yorkshire Ripper. Here's where the story really begins for me and my involvement in it. As I said at the beginning of the show, one of my favorite authors and heroes is the British journalist and investigative journalist called David A. Yallop. He wrote the book called they wrote the book in God's Name about the assassination of Pope John Paul I by Propagande Due, the Italian Freemasonry organization, in collusion with the mafia, because he was going to open the banks on Vatican City. And this led to a famous Freemason called Roberto Calvi, an Italian guy who was the Vatican's banker, no less, found swinging from Blackfriars Bridge in London after he banged on the door of the London Freemasonic Temple begging for refuge. Now, that book in God's Name is one of the first books that ever woke me up. And if you ever want, if people ever say to you there's no such thing as conspiracy theories, give them a copy of that book, and that will shut them up ever. Now, Yallop also wrote a book called Deliver Us from Evil, The Yorkshire Ripper, The Hunt, The Arrest, The Trial, and the Full Horrific Story. This book, I still have my original copy from 1981. Yallop was very similar to what they call today an embedded journalist, a journalist who goes into the front line and works directly with the people involved in it. In his case, he was with the South and West Yorkshire Police at a time where women, mainly prostitutes but not exclusively, were being murdered in cities in the north of England, ranging from Preston through Manchester and places like Huddersfield, Thetford and Leeds, on a corridor which I had named the 666 corridor, because it runs, the murders have taken place between the M6, the M61 and the M62. These three motorways, these three highways, as you can call them, through this heavily populated part of England. The murders began in summer 1975, and they continued until the last victim in 1980. These are officially the ones attributed to him. A guy was arrested called Peter Sutcliffe, eventually a truck driver, and charged with these killings, at least these 20 murders, 13 officially, but he probably would have killed like 20, that many people believe, that he couldn't prove them all, and maybe even more. Now, Yallop was in the investigation, inside the investigation. This is the journalist. And in his book, Delivers from Evil, he points out that this was a murder investigation that was deliberately thrown into chaos. That there was definitely an accomplice working, maybe at least one accomplice, working with Peter Sutcliffe, their killer. However, there was another. There had to have been another, because this guy on his own could not have the strength to hold down these women and kill them the way he did. Even if he was a psychopath, it's very difficult. You know, at Scotland Yard detective told me this, that it's very difficult to kill even a young child, because they have the instinct to survive and they're fighting death. They will unleash incredible amounts of adrenaline. And that's why he told me that he does not believe that Sutcliffe was killing on his own. Now, how Savile comes into this. One of the victims, a woman called Irene Richardson, she was a poor, unfortunate soul. She was practically homeless. She was 28 years old, was practically found dead in Savile's back garden on Soldiers Field behind his apartment in Leeds in I think it was June 1977. It was either spring or summer 1977. Now, this is what tipped me off. How Sutcliffe killed these women was he used a ball-peen hammer, which is a hammer that has a ball on the back rather than a claw. You know, a regular claw hammer we don't remove nails. The ball hammer is used for shaping metals. It's a very specific hammer that a metal worker uses. They were killed with this hammer. What did Savile say on the Louis Theroux interview? Women are brain damage. That's how I linked Sutcliffe's accomplice. To my amazement, not long after I was posting about this on Facebook, I was saying to people, I think Savile was connected to Sutcliffe. The Daily Mirror newspaper in England shows a photograph of Jimmy Savile standing next to the Yorkshire Ripper in Broadmoor maximum security prison / hospital, shaking hands with the famous British boxer Frank Bruno, another bizarre, interesting character, which I don't want to go into much into tonight. There was the direct link. Then it transpires that back in the 90s, while Savile was being investigated for something else, the cop asked, the copper who was interviewing Savile said that Savile boasted about, if they wanted the Yorkshire Ripper, all they had to do was knock on my front door in Leeds. And then the copper said to Savile, Jimmy, what do you mean by that? And he says, I have a few friends in the forensic labs up there, if you know what I mean. Savile had at least one person found dead in his backyard. He knew Sutcliffe personally. Yallop speculated that there was a second killer. He had to have been a high-profile killer, and he had to be someone that the police investigation was deliberately wrecking. After the murder of one of the women, Margaret Thatcher, the then Prime Minister, personal friend of Savile, said she had enough of hearing about, wait to hear this one, these wretched women being killed.
Oh my God.
That's how she described it. Went up to Leeds, took charge of the investigation, and then suddenly, out of the blue, this guy Sutcliffe is arrested. And that's the end of that. Closed and shut down. Yallop finishes the book saying there was definitely someone out there that would have the same blood type as another person, and it turns out that Savile has the same blood type too, and was also, and this is really significant, a secretor. Now, what a secretor is someone who passes blood through either urine or semen.
Step into the world of power, loyalty, and luck.
I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
With family, cannolis, and spins mean everything.
Now, you wanna get mixed up in the family business.
Introducing The Godfather at ChumbaCasino.com. Test your luck in the shadowy world of The Godfather slot.
Someday, I will call upon you to do a service for me.
Play The Godfather now at ChumbaCasino.com.
Welcome to the family.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 18+. Terms and conditions apply.
Sutcliffe didn't do that, but one of the killers did. It transpired that Savile was a secretor. It was admitted indirectly on the Louis Theroux show because he washed his same pair of underpants every single day. He was been conditioned in a ritualistic manner from the 70s to keep washing his underpants to destroy the evidence of his blood and his other body fluids found on these women. And one more thing, it turns out now, and this is mainstream, again, that Savile was asked to present, and I don't know if it ever happened, a dental impression by the South Yorkshire police at the time of the killings because the teeth marks did not match Sutcliffe. So therefore, someone in the South Yorkshire police knew that Savile was somehow connected to the killings.
A couple of questions. Now, you said that he was being investigated for other crimes. That was one question. Another question is, do we have a DNA sample of Savile that we could now compare back? There must be some evidence withheld from these victims back in with the Sutcliffe case.
Yeah, but they haven't reopened it yet because it hasn't come out. The Sutcliffe thing hasn't come out yet. It will come out. It will be confirmed, but they're leaking these things out bit by bit. They're conditioning the public. They're getting them ready for the big one, and the big one will be that Savile was a serial killer. But they will do. They'll have no. There will be. What we need now, although it's a difficult one, is to try and get the families of the people who were murdered. And remember, it's a long time ago now. The last victim was back in 1980. To try and come out and ask for this investigation to be reopened. It's very easy to just all blame it on Sutcliffe, but there's so many other things that does.
Sutcliffe is still alive, or Sutcliffe is dead?
Oh, he's still alive. He's still alive, and he's still alive. And he's
Okay.
still enjoying life in Broadmoor.
Have you tried to contact him?
Pardon?
Have you tried to contact him?
I have indeed. I wrote a letter to him. I don't know. I never got They're not allowed access to the internet because they'll use it to try and pick up women and stuff.
Sure.
But I never got an answer back. I probably won't. But what I did find out is that soon after I was put on a watch list by the British airports.
Yeah, that'll happen too. Yeah. Now, what about you said that he was a suspect in some other crimes that he was being investigated for. What were those other allegations?
We're talking about Savile now.
Savile, yeah.
There was another murder that took place in a town that I'm actually quite familiar with called Hebden Bridge in between Yorkshire and Manchester. There was a young girl called Leslie Jo Rimmer was found in the canal where she'd been strangled. Savile had been living in a caravan. Now we're talking about a multi-millionaire who could stay in the best hotels, was living very close by in a mobile home, in a trailer, what you call in the United States, in the grounds of a pub, and he was the only one in the whole area of all the males, although he'd been seen wandering around the hills at night where this girl was seen, this 14-year-old girl was seen. And a friend of mine who was a friend of this girl was murdered, said that they all used to stay in a house that belonged to a rich family, and they were young teenage kids. They used to drink beer and smoke pot, but the rich family, they were just poor kids who were friends of a rich family. And Leslie Jo Rimmer was one of these kids, and Savile must have been alerted to her because she was basically came from a troubled home. There's definitely no one in the family was involved, and the police took evidence, statements, and prints from 3,000 men in the small rural area. Everyone, including the vicar, the minister in the church, but they did not ask Jimmy Savile.
Oh my God!
And the minister of the church, everyone except the main suspect was a suspect, and Savile sneaked out of the area. And 2 years ago, one of the parish leaders of one of the Church of England Protestant churches asked for the case to be reopened and DNA of Savile taken to see if they showed up in any of the autopsies. This is another one that Savile was involved in, and it goes on further. Savile was involved in, as I said, numerous charities. One of them included a home in the islands of Jersey, in the Channel Islands, which is a series of islands that belong to the UK, which are off the coast of France. Now, this home, Savile, according to an investigator presenting very good evidence, you're not going to believe it when I tell you this one.
Okay.
The Prime Minister prior to Margaret Thatcher was a guy called Edward Heath. He was a paedophile. Notorious and very well documented paedophile. He lighted tapes for young prepubescent boys. He had a yacht called the Morning Star, Lucifer. Okay, the yacht, Savile would procure young boys for him from this home in Jersey. These were like young runaway boys or orphans, troubled kids. Ted Heath, the Prime Minister of Britain, would take them out on the yacht with Savile, do what they did to them, unspeakable things, throw the bodies overboard. That went on.
How do we know that? How do we know that, though? Where do we get that information from?
Well, this evidence has not gone mainstream yet, but there's tremendous evidence of people who worked with these people and knew them, who've come forward bit by bit over the years. There's a guy in the UK called Bill Maloney. He runs this thing called Pie and Mash Films. He's actually quite a hero in many ways, who's been chasing politicians down the street and calling them paedophiles. And these fellas have actually been arrested eventually.
Yeah.
And these people have compiled vast amounts of evidence from people who were involved in politics, civil servants, even policemen who were investigating this, who blowing this massive elitist pedophile/murder ring wide open. There's other things as well. There was the Irish police were investigating something that was happening at the border between Northern Ireland, which is part of the UK, and Southern Ireland, which is where I live, involving boys that were being moved across the border by the security forces from a place called Kincora. Kincora was a boys' home, again, another place in Belfast. And they found out that MI5 was transporting these young boys into a ring of network of paedophiles among Freemasons and Orangemen, which included, incredible as it sounds, the Queen's brother, Lord Mountbatten, who lived in a Gothic castle very close to where I live called Classy Bon, who was allegedly blown up by the IRA by a bomb in 1980, but it's never, I'm starting to wonder now if Mountbatten was ever killed. And a young boy was on the boat with him who was found dead in the water. Again, this is what was going on. This is what these people...
I remember the Mountbatten explosion. Was there any explanation as to the young boy?
He was a young boy from the area who was supposed to be tied up with the fishing boat, but apparently, according to the locals, many of whom I know, Mountbatten seemed to have a young boy going out with him on the boat all the time.
Oh my God!
And these were shipped across the border from Kincora. This is now mainstream. The Irish Times are blowing this story open bit by bit. MI5, British Secret Service, who also took out Jill Dando, the politician, the presenter who figured out that Savile was the head of this ring, was heavily involved.
How do we know Dando was taken up by MI5?
Oh, it was a professional hit, absolutely. Two things. One, when it first broke, they tried to make out it was the Serbian Secret Service, because that was at the time that the whole thing was going on with Serbia. That a Serbian Secret Service, a guy wearing a suit carrying a revolver with a silencer, pushed her in a perfect hit, pushed her down on the ground and put put a bullet in the back of her head, killing her instantly. It's now come out in the papers that it was the British Secret Service. That's out in the open now. Okay. This is what's come out in the paper. So this is not speculation. Again, this is out. And this is how far things have moved, and so quickly they have moved in this very, very short time. It basically comes down to a network of hardcore paedophiles at the very height of British society. A number of them serial killers into necrophilia, and in the middle of it all, the kind of like the mad conductor at the center of this orchestra was a TV presenter and radio DJ called Jimmy Savile. He connects to everything. And Savile was, even the way, I'll give you an example of the games he used to play. During the height of the Sutcliffe Yorkshire Ripper serial killer, hysteria, and it was hysteria. A tape was sent to the West Yorkshire Police, I think it was. It was inside a cassette single by a singer called Andrew Gold. The voice claimed to be that of the Yorkshire Ripper, talking with a very specific north of England accent, what's called a Geordie accent. There's people up in the northeast of England speak with this accent. I'll give you an example of someone who has the accent. It's Brian Johnston, the singer from AC/DC. It almost sounds like an Irish accent or a Scottish accent, but it's English. And this cassette was delivered to the cops, and it was a cassette single. At the time, cassette singles were very, very rare. Generally, they were only given to DJs because they were useful for playing the songs on the radio. So you could actually, they could put the cassette in. Now, this is not long after Irene Richardson's body was found back basically in in Sutcliffe's in Savile's backyard. Now, The single had the voice saying, admitting it, and it was also a letter. Now, this is what's so bizarre about this Yorkshire Ripper thing. This became almost like a psyop in itself. This wasn't long after Thatcher got involved, where loudspeakers would be set up in factories and in shops and even in the city centres of these towns where the murders were taking place. And in a Big Brother kind of weird, creepy way, like a horror movie, this tape of the serial killer that came out of claiming to be the Yorkshire Ripper in this voice, which was played all the time to people to put them in a state of terror. And people it got so bad that women were starting to believe that their husband or their boyfriend was the Yorkshire Ripper. And this was all part of the psyop to throw the chaos throw the investigation into complete and utter madness and chaos, to create the most wildest goose chase it's been called in criminal history, looking for somebody. Now, years later, a guy in the north of England claimed that it was him that made the tape, and it was him that wrote the letter. I am not convinced. I think
it is Ryan Seacrest here. There was a recent social media trend which consisted of flying on a plane with no music, no movies, no entertainment. But a better trend would be going to ChumbaCasino.com. It's like having a mini social casino in your pocket. Chumba Casino has over 100 online casino-style games, all absolutely free. It's the most fun you can have online and on a plane. So grab your free welcome bonus now at ChumbaCasino.com. Sponsored by Chumba Casino. No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
That guy who claimed he was that was one of these kind of nutcases who, they pretend they killed somebody. There's always like a serial killer goes on, or there's a mass crime. There's always a lunatic looking for attention who shows up and pretends that they were doing it. I think this guy was one of them, and he had enough time to mimic the accent on the tape and to actually fake the handwriting. If you look at the handwriting of the letter, it looks like somebody struggling to put a different handwriting on than they normally speak with. It's almost kind of labored, and that I believe that was Savile. And the cassette tape, it sounds like someone who doesn't speak with a natural Geordie accent. It's someone who's faking it. Now, Savile, after he was involved in a lot of this stuff, fled to his mother's apartment in a town called Scarborough, which is a very dark place. This is a place that's notorious for police corruption and everything. And then it was only a short journey there north to Newcastle, where the tape was posted from. And in the tape, he says, "I don't get up north much." Now, why would someone who lives in that place say, "I don't get up north much"? Because this guy who confessed to the crime said that he'd always lived up north. So it was somebody in the south.
But the guy who's confessing to making the tape, he's not confessing to doing the murders. He was confessing to a hoax of hoaxing the tape?
Confessing to the hoax, yeah. Confessing to the hoax, yeah. But Savile is I'm still convinced is the person on that tape. Right. For the simple reason that this guy got a cassette single that was only distributed among DJs. And this guy was a nobody. This is the kind of thing that went on.
Right.
And the police encouraged this wild goose chase. Because Lialop was saying that every time they came near who the killers may have been, the killers now, plural, the police threw it into chaos. Another thing was, there's currently one of Savile's buddies, another no-talent BBC welfare case from Top of the Pops, called Dave Lee Travis, as I said, is currently back on trial again.
Right.
He is the spitting image of Phil Sutcliffe at that period. Now, there was an identity kit, remember the old police identity kits where they used to get people described, people who escaped, they saw someone who looked like they might have been the killer, what did his eyes look like, and they used to have these old little photographs where they'd stick everything together and build an identity kit photo. Well, they got so many descriptions were put together, and they built this face and this look, and the guy looks like Dave Lee Travis. Now, the police did not want to release this, okay? Now, Dave Lee Travis is now up as a sex predator, He's been charged with this at the moment. He was on top of the pops. He was a friend of Savile, and he hung out the same part of England at the same time. The police were annoyed because the media managed to one of the policemen, who probably were figuring out that the senior detectives in the case were actually trying to destroy the case, snuck out to the media the photographs of the identity kit of this killer. And it looked, one of them in particular, but all of them really do, look like, more like Dave Lee Travis at that time than they look like Sutcliffe. That's another bizarre thing. And I posted a picture on my Facebook page tonight of Savile and Sutcliffe at a BBC Christmas party where they're over a turkey, and Dave Lee Travis is holding a big carving knife and making like a wild killer gesture as he's stabbing the turkey.
But that's you made a mistake. You didn't mean to say Sutcliffe just then, right?
Oh, sorry. I meant Dave Lee Travis. Mistake. I'm sorry. It's all right. But this is, I believe that Sutcliffe was involved, but he was almost a fall guy for a team of killers that were probably BBC DJs. Look how many of these creatures have actually gone to prison or been exposed as paedophiles after their death. Just about all of them. The top DJs at the time in the BBC, nearly all of them have been busted or exposed as paedophiles, including a guy called Jonathan King, who was, when you hear this one, who was, when he went down for being a paedophile back in the 1990s, who paid his bail money, an unknown office clerk by the name of Simon Cowell.
Oh, shit. You gotta be kidding me, man.
All in the papers, all out in the open.
And has he made a statement about that? Why?
Oh, he said nothing about it. But it's come out that Simon Cowell, when he was an unknown, quote-unquote, office clerk, paid £65,000, which is a nice chunk of money back in the 1990s, to pay the bail money of a serial paedophile DJ/record producer, Jonathan King. I mean, we are living in the Borgia days, so Simon Cowell is caught up in this as well.
Now, what is Cowell's connection to Savile?
Well, he probably must have known him when he was there.
Yeah,
Cowell is another strange one. So he goes from being a clerk at a record company to being the most powerful person in music in the world. Yeah. How did that happen?
Not just music, TV now too.
Yep. There's another connection. I mean, Simon Cowell, they all knew what was going on. And, I mean, it's never been, he has said nothing about it, Simon Cowell, about paying off King's bail money. Now, King turned out to be an absolute predator. What he would do is, and this is interesting, writing this to Cowell, is he would promise fame and fortune to up-and-coming boy bands, this kind of thing, and then would basically rape these young boys and then discard them. And when he was finally busted, I mean, he was so bad when he was finally busted, Cowell paid bail money at first, and then he went down for it anyway and went to prison. I think he's out of prison now. And when he was sentenced, he said that in decades to come, he would be seen the same way Oscar Wilde is seen now, that there's nothing wrong with having sex with children. And it doesn't end there. I mean, it just this thing just goes on and on and on. This is what I was saying about, like, when people say, have things ended? You know, are we seeing any fruits of this alternative conspiracy movement? Well, by God, with the Savile stuff we are. And I have to say, the credit even goes to people like David Icke, who even was talking about Savile a good while ago, although he wasn't getting full out there about it. But he was definitely talking about Ted Heath and other people. And we are now seeing the fruits of this. We're seeing it manifested, and it's coming. We're actually, I actually do believe this is seismic. It is seismic because if you look at the comments of the newspaper articles about these stories, people are, like ordinary people in the UK are literally they're ready for the worst revelations. It's
but are they?
Pardon?
Are they standing up and demanding arrests, demanding investigations, or are they just kind of, because, you know, with Michael Jackson too, people are just kind of, they joke about it. Are they joking about it?
No, they're not joking about it. It's gotten very dark, and there is a lot of anger out there. and people want to know more. It's not dying. Someone said to me tonight, and it's true, the mainstream folks are ready for this, and the journalists in the mainstream are giving it to them. And you could speculate, okay, there's all kinds of other reasons for that. They're trying to normalize paedophile, but they can't, because so much of it involves murders and criminality and killing.
It's vital that the serial killing comes out, because they do tend to joke about the pedophilia and the child rape, but you can't joke about serial killings. Anyway, real quick, let me take a break here and read some commercials, because we got to pay the bills. And we're back with Thomas Sheridan with probably some of those most fascinating stories we've ever had on this show, in a situation of breaking news. So, man, okay, we got about not even 20 minutes. We got about 16, 17 minutes. Unless you want to stay up like a half hour after, we're going to take some calls. We got 17 minutes exactly. Unless you want to hang out for a little bit after, no pressure. It's up to you. But
I'll stay for the calls.
I love you, man. I knew you would. I knew you would, man. But thank you. Yeah, this is great stuff. Oh my God! It's
important to get these stories out and hear as many people around the world hearing them. It's important that American people hear this, because this is what happens when absolute power takes over any country and is unbridled and has the media and everything to do its work and keep its secrets quiet. This is how sick and how evil and twisted it gets, and that's what makes this the story. I knew that when the Savile thing broke, I knew this would be the story. Forget all the other conspiracies. This was the one out there that would actually damage an actual government and an actual control system, and maybe get us to somewhere decent again. I knew this was it, and it looks like that the mainstream are on side with us. They're ready to go with this. That's why I'm saying it's a horrible story. It's dark, but there's a lot of positives too. Yeah. We're winning. We're winning.
Now, what about his connections? Because when I was Googling, looking for a picture for you to put up on the blog, the Opperman Report blog, I noticed that there's a lot of pictures of Savile with the Catholic priests and bishops and big shots in the Catholic Church. Now, what do we have there?
Well, he claimed to be a devout Catholic, although there's not much proof he ever went to Mass or church on a regular basis. He was very heavily involved in the Catholic Church. He was very heavily I'm talking about the upper echelon of the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
He was very involved in pushing this idea if he was a Catholic. In fact, when he died, they laid him out in a hospital, I think it was in Leeds, and they had this big crucifix beside him. And if you see the photographs, he literally was laid in state and almost nothing to his coffin. But he was literally laid in state. And he was put there in a very kind of it looked like Dracula's tomb. I'm not kidding.
Really? But none of these people like Prince Charles and them, they didn't come down because by then the scandal had already been out?
Well, no. When he died, they were all talking about how wonderful he was. People, all these phonies like Stephen Fry, the ultimate cultural Marxist, all these other people were all, what a wonderful man, including an individual called Esther Ratson, who was she was probably the biggest female TV presenter of that period in the 70s and 80s. And wait to hear this one, she was in charge of an organization called Childline. Childline was a telephone number that children who are being abused sexually or otherwise could call up and then could be investigated, the child could be protected. She was the head of this, right?
Hello, it is Ryan, and I was on a flight the other day playing one of my favorite social spin slot games on ChumbaCasino.com. I looked over at the person sitting next to me, and you know what they were doing? They were also playing Chumba Casino. Everybody's loving having fun with it. Chumba Casino is home to hundreds of casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com to claim your free welcome bonus. That's ChumbaCasino.com and live the Chumba life.
Sponsored by Chumba Casino. No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
He was amazingly close buddies with Savile at the time. It was well known in the BBC, and many presenters, including ones I mean, I don't know these names in America, but Bill Oddie was a big TV presenter. He's come out and said everyone knew Savile was up to it. Everyone knew he was up to it. She was the head of the biggest child protection agency in the UK, and she was friends with Savile. And it's now coming out and being speculated that she was actually a pimp. That she was actually a pimp when they would rescue these children from these abusive places. They were handed over to these major pedophiles. This is what was going on. And when she was literally surrounded, she was very quick to call anyone a pedophile, right?
Okay.
That they were poor and working class. But the biggest pedophiles in the BBC all around her, loads of whom have now been sentenced or have court cases, such as Rolf Harris and Savile, she said nothing. She was, and that's all Childline was. It was like a big pimping service or something like that. That's all it could have been. It could be, allegedly, I'd say that. It could be nothing else. It certainly wasn't protecting children. And God, what a horrific thought to think that children who were probably being molested were calling this organization, and the head of it was probably getting their phone numbers and bringing them to someone else. We'll probably never find that one out.
Well, you know what? I had Detective Jim Rothstein on the show, who talks about. In fact, he investigated the Protestant Church as well in the Son of Sam case, and he calls those groups, he calls them candy stores, because that's where these pedophiles, all these group homes and these shelters for kids and stuff like that, they call them candy stores, and that's where the pedophile rings go in there and pick up kids. It's organized.
Yeah, Boys Town in America is a famous one. Yeah,
exactly.
And they build mythologies around themselves, like, even the Holly song, "He Ain't Heavy, He's My Brother," beautiful song. But it's about Boys Town, which is the revelations came out in that. Conspiracy of Silence, I think, was the name of the film that BBC made, Granada Television, I think it was, in the UK, made about the Boys Town home, that they found that basically they were feeding young boys as far up to the White House.
Oh, yeah.
And it was pulled the night before broadcast. Definitely a film you should watch. But so it goes on in the US too. And so here was this one, Esther Ranson, basically in charge of protecting children and giving them to Savile. Now, another one that's amazing, and it's great, like, we live in a fantastic time where people can pull out their old VHS tapes and find something. The Sex Pistols, the punk band, the first, like, big punk band, the Sex Pistols.
Yes.
They appeared on a TV show. Now, it wasn't just Savile who was, like, raping girls and young boys at the TV stations. It was all the presenters, not all of them, but large numbers of the presenters were doing it, because it was just seen that anyone who came into the TV studio was fair game. There was a TV show that they became famous for called, with a guy called Bill Grundy. It was a sort of like a dinner time chat show in London. And the Sex Pistols, including a couple of girls, one of whom was Susie Sue, from later on become Susie and the Banshees, were in the studio. And of course, what happened was he said something to one of the girls, and you never thought about that until in recent times, where he said, and these were all young kids at the time, including the Sex Pistols, they're all like 17, 18. He said to one of the girls, she said something like, "Oh, I'm a big fan of you. I'm delighted to meet you." And he said something, the old guy says to her, the presenter, Bill Grundy, says, "Oh, really? Well, I'll be seeing you backstage later on." And Steve Jones, one of the Sex Pistols, the guitar player, and he's only a young kid at the time, he goes, "You dirty F word." And Grundy goes, "What do you mean by that?" And then they all start abusing Grundy. They were thrown off the air and they were vilified. A tape recently came out of Johnny Rotten, and this is amazing. These punk rockers were portrayed as the enemy of England, the enemy of morality, the enemies of family values, and yet here's an 18-year-old Johnny Rotten saying to a person, "I want to kill Jimmy Savile," on tape, and the woman saying, "Why?" "Because he gets up to unspeakable acts at the BBC along with the rest of them." Right. So here were the punk rockers who were actually the voice of decency and morality, and they were the ones being vilified by the establishment.
Yeah, I heard that tape this week, when I was researching the show.
Yep, he was only a kid at the time. But they were the only voices standing up against it, and that was the real reason that the BBC wouldn't let God Save the Queen be the #1 single, and struck it off the charts and wouldn't let them on Top of the Pops.
So they were never on Top of the Pops then, right?
No, and even though the single was #1, even this God Save the Queen was #1 They did not let them on the charts, and they struck them off. There was like a line where they were number one.
Yeah. What about the Stones with the Savile?
It's interesting. In that tape, Johnny Rotten also says, I'd like to kill Mick Jagger too. Well, let's talk about the Stones here. Okay, I don't know if there was a connection between him and Savile, but the Stones were involved with some very peculiar and dodgy people, such as Kenneth Anger.
Right.
And there were, there's famous stories that they were recording one of the albums at Sympathy for the Devil in this chateau in southern France, and some of the stories are incredible. Like Keith Richards was asleep in his room. When he woke up the next morning, the door had been nailed shut, and the door had been painted gold. And Anger had told him that he had done it during the night as a spirit form, and these kinds of things. And they were very heavily involved with him. And this is where all this goat head soup and all this Sympathy for the Devil and all this stuff came from Kenneth Anger. We know Anger was a big time occultist. And so there was a connection to Savile. I haven't discovered it yet, other than probably through him introducing them somewhere. But it's there. It'll be through the Kenneth Anger stuff, in through that network. Yes.
Now, what about the Who? One of the members of the Who was arrested. Didn't they find child pornography on his computer?
Yeah, Peter Townsend is an absolute strange character. I mean, I hate, and it's kind of difficult to deal with this because I'm a big fan of the Who, and I mean,
I know what you mean.
I know it's difficult, but yeah, he went to a website and he bought. The police bust you only if you buy images. Because people can accidentally stumble on sites, right. But he bought images. He actually purchased them. That's when they bust you, if you actually pay for the images with your credit card or something like that. And that's what happened to him. And he claimed he only did it for research. And I don't know about him. That's I've heard people say things about him, and it hasn't come. But he's definitely a peculiar and strange individual. I mean,
did you know that here in the U.S. They did an investigation at the Pentagon, and I think it was 5,000 employees at the Pentagon had purchased child pornography with their credit cards.
Oh yeah, I covered that in my first book, Puzzling People.
Yeah, that was covered up.
Yeah, that was big time. That did come out. That was covered. Even the New York Times did a great investigation into it. Speaking of Townsend, there's that great. I mean, it's a great song from Quadrophenia. Out of My Brain on the 515, and the first lyric that Townsend sings is like girls of 15, sexually knowing. So it goes back a long time with him, unfortunately.
All right, we got 5 minutes left. The number to call in is 702-605-4894, or you could Skype in at ed.opperman. We're going to drop the Studio A Revolution Radio server in 5 minutes, but we'll still be on cjmarsradio.com, and you can go to the chat room over at cjmarsradio.com. So while we're still on both stations, Thomas, is there anything you want to leave us with before we go to the after show?
No, I would just say thank you for this opportunity to bring this story to people in America, because it's very important that people in the United States know these things, because it's happening in all our countries, and it's happening with the upper echelon of society. And we should not be afraid of tackling these stories, because this is the nearest we'll get to revolution in our lifetime. This is how it'll happen. And there are forces now in the mainstream that have swung in behind us. So it may seem like, we've been in this kind of alternative world for a long time now and nothing ever happens. But the Savile story is proof it does happen, and we can win, and we are winning. And, it's just like you do have to look at the dark shadow in order to find the light. And I believe now we're finding the light. We're going to get more and more police, more and more journalists are going to speak up, and we're going to win this. I know we are.
Well, okay, man, from your lips to God's ears, because it does seem to me that the thread through these elites, is Satanism, is child molestation, is human sacrifice, it's blood sacrifice over and over and over again with these people. And they do seem to obtain some kind of power from it. So I would just hope that we could all... Now, what about your faith? Do you have any kind of a faith in God or...
I'm not quite an atheist. I'm probably an agnostic with a small a, but I do believe that there are magical forces and supernatural powers because, well, I mean, since I started this Savile stuff and went public with it, I've had very strange experiences. I've had what I would call psychic attacks, and
right.
I mean, yeah, I've had them. I mean, I did a broadcast on my old radio show. If you can look up on YouTube, it's called the 666 Killer on Savile, and I broadcast that night, and there's bizarre sounds all over it whenever I mention Savile's name. I've even got like goosebumps here now even talking about it. The next day my internet went down. I called up the phone guy, and the internet connection box, the inside of the circuits had been completely fried. While I was researching other things, I've had bizarre I've definitely been psychically attacked over this. There are dark forces. I went from being, when I started going out there, but educating people in psychopathology, I was probably almost an atheist. I would actually say now, if you wanted to be my honest opinion of what Savile and people like that are, they're shadows of demons that have been cast upon this earth.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I expose this kind of stuff as well, and I'm under attack all the time. But I have a faith in Jesus Christ, man. I believe that the blood of Jesus has protected me. Otherwise, I think I'd be under the prison or under the graveyard right now.
Well, whatever you can grab.
Yeah.
I always remember that story of World War I, where even atheist soldiers and Protestant soldiers would get Catholic holy medals just because they believed that something would give them power. In my case, I do believe that I do kind of feel very connected to the Nordic archetypes of that kind of thing, even if they're not real beings or anything like that. But there's a strength in calling down a force of decency that can actually protect you. Even if it's not real, it still gives you strength.
Okay, listen to that. Okay, the show's over.
How to have fun, anytime, anywhere. Step 1. Go to ChumbaCasino.com.
ChumbaCasino.com. Got it.
Step 2. Collect your welcome bonus.
Come to Papa welcome bonus.
Step 3. Play hundreds of casino-style games for free.
That's a lot of games. All for free?
Step 4. Unleash your excitement.
Woohoo! Chumba Casino has been delivering thrills for over a decade. So claim your free welcome bonus now and live the Chumba life. Visit ChumbaCasino.com. VGW Group. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.